Thank you, everybody, for being here. Are we good? The organizers asked me to come in and talk a little bit about my journey that I like to call Farm to Photonics. You can drop the fancy slogan there. I just put that on there. In the hope that potentially I can inspire others to kind of forge new paths and just dream big and do great things, right? If anything, some of the lessons learned that I'm going to talk about through this slide deck, hopefully you can employ those in your everyday lives and help and improve where you're at or allow you to achieve big things. Early childhood, I don't know where that picture came from or why my mom did my hair like that. The 80s were a crazy time. But I grew up in northeast Montana, in Wolf Point, on the middle of the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. So maybe not the best of beginnings there. There's a lot of positives and negatives from growing up in an environment like that. I'll start with the positives. People up there, due to a lot of circumstances, resources, weather, whatever it might be, are very resilient, gritty people. That bled off onto me. I've used those things in my entire life, so I can't thank growing up there enough for that. From a negative perspective, I think you guys heard some of the negative connotations of those locations. I've watched my community get overrun with drugs, alcohol, crime. I've lost 3 people that I call friends to homicides on the reservation, and potentially more, right? So maybe not the best location to grow up in to where I got to today. But it's about overcoming, right? And pulling the great things out of where you come from. And so great work ethic is one of the things that I learned in my journey, right? I grew up on a farm, 2,000-acre wheat farm, 35 miles from the closest town, 7 miles to the closest neighbor. We worked our butts off, right? I'm convinced that my dad told my mom to have me just so he could have a hired hand. And I can tell you a story why that's true. I used to pick rock a lot, and I picked it by hand because you have to pick rock before you seed or else you're going to break your equipment. I went over to my friend's house. They had a rock picker that they were pulling behind a tractor. So I went home to Dad and I said, why don't we buy a rock picker? And he looked me dead in the eyes and said, why would I spend all that money when I have you? And then when I came back the first time from college, guess what he had? A rock picker. Needless to say. Work ethic and accountability are keys to success. I've used those my entire career. I think they're key to everything, right? Accountability. I was lucky enough to grow up in the age without cell phones. We farmed in the middle of nowhere. My dad said I needed to pick him up somewhere. I had to be there. There was no texting and saying, sorry, couldn't make it. We had to be there. We had to be accountable. We had to get the work done. There was no excuses, right? Additionally, stuff breaks down all the time. 7 miles from home, on a tractor, plowing a field. Tractor breaks down, toolbar breaks down. What do? Am I going to sit there and die? Am I going to walk 7 miles back home in 100-degree heat? You're going to fix the problem. There's no YouTube. There's no AI. You got to solve the problem on your own. Learn those skills very quickly. If I have one thing when people ask me what was my greatest asset and where I've gotten in my career, work ethic and accountability, problem solving, right? Other people have talked about that. You got to be able to solve problems. In today's day and age, that's becoming more difficult because we have tools right in our hands to solve problems for us. Learn ways to not use that. Learn ways to develop your problem-solving skills. I've also faced a lot of adversity. When I was 9 years old, I was in a terrible ATV accident. I had a complete compound fracture of my right arm. I lost all nerve damage throughout my right arm. It missed my main artery from dying from about, I think the doctor said about 1 millimeter. So lots of adversity faced through that. I spent about 2 years in and out of hospitals, Seattle Children's Hospital, getting nerve transplants from my legs, put into my arm. But like I said, Bree said that too. You learn a lot from those. It gave me a new perspective on life that I think was a spark in where I've gotten to today. I wanted to take advantage of my second opportunity to do that. Additionally, in my childhood, I had a lot of sparks, and I think it's really important to be that spark. I had a teacher in my senior year that with his own money went and bought this robotic arm and just gave it to us and said, program it, play with it, learn it. That really was my spark for ultimately where I went into undergrad in computer science. He didn't have to do that. He just did it. I love that. I'm trying to be a spark to other people, and I encourage everybody to do so also. That's my farm, by the way, and you can see it's in the middle of nowhere. I moved on, graduated valedictorian from Wolf Point, went to Montana State, undergrad in computer science. Started out, it was kind of a rough start. Could breeze through high school, didn't have to study very hard. It was relatively easy, valedictorian. Tried to pull those same shenanigans when I went to college. I think after my first year, I was about a 2.5 GPA. I've never gotten a B in my entire life. It was a little bit of a wake-up call. You actually got to work at this when you move beyond that. Probably got to drink a little less beer as well, but that was achieved also. So graduated with honors still. And then I realized when I graduated, you kind of have this vision in your head, all right, graduating is the end. You're going to get this job, you're going to work for 30 years, you're going to retire, you're going to move on, do all these things, right? I got out of undergrad, I was completely lost. I had a degree that I didn't really think that I actually wanted to do. I had offers in big cities to move away from Montana and take a programming job and sit behind a desk. Family's important to me, right? I did not want to leave my family, my friends. I didn't want to leave Montana. This is such a great place to live. So I turned down those offers, but you can imagine I was very lost and confused, and I think a lot of people feel that when they graduate with their undergrad. What am I going to do next? And so in my belief, this is the beginning, not the end. So I realized a lot of things from what I say is my core value perspectives, like family, friends, Montana. That's really important for my core value system. So what I'll say in that is, like, you can get paralysis by analysis and sit there and think of it and say, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Which is what I was doing. At some point, you got to take a step. That step might not be the right direction. It might be wrong, but you got to take a step. And I think that's the most important part that I learned in that process. From there, I took my first job interview on a company in town called S2 Corporation, working on photonics, crazy technology. I assumed I was going to walk in, sit across from a bunch of people in suit and ties. I had a suit and tie on. It was completely opposite, right? Life after school doesn't go as expected. I walk into this lab. There's a bunch of people wearing tank tops, flip-flops. They literally have no idea why I'm there. None whatsoever. At some point in this interview process, I'm riding on the back of a moped with the CEO across campus here. Talk about strange, right? And I walk out of that and I'm like, there's no way I'm taking this job. This is not what I envisioned it looking like. I can't take this job. I took that step. I took the job, and even in the first month or 2 months and 3 months of that job, I was doing things like setting up cubicles and hooking up phone services for the new office they were moving into and hooking up internet. And I was like, I'm way overqualified to be doing this. I should not be doing this. But, my childhood growing up, I never was taught to quit. So I just stuck with it. And then about 6 months in, once we moved in, I got to go into the laboratory and see these lasers shooting all over this table through these crystals and cryogenic coolers and all this crazy stuff. And I was instantly like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. And so got an opportunity to start working in the lab, and I was able to find my passion. I loved work every day, where before I was pretty much miserable going in there. If you can find your passion for what you want to do, don't confuse that with your hobby. Talk about a work passion. It's very important because you're going to spend a lot of time working, and if you enjoy what you do every day and you're passionate about it, it's going to make life a lot more enjoyable. I was lucky to find that. Once I got there, building trust through work ethic and accountability, I go back to these two things that I really rely on from my perspective. Work ethic and accountability, that builds trust, right? My boss, my colleagues, I was always there. I never left. I was the last one to leave. If anybody needed help, I was there. They could rely on me, right? These things of building that trust carried me a long ways. The people that I ultimately co-founded companies with 20 years down the road were those people that I built that trust with early on in my career. That's very imperative, in my opinion, to do those things. And ultimately, you can see these pictures. I got to do a bunch of crazy stuff. Sorry, with the shirt off. That's the only one I could find. But got to go to the Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands and image the International Space Station with the technology that we had. Just a bunch of amazing experiences. Couldn't be happier that I got to experience that. But I wanted to control my own destiny. So once I found my passion, I'm like, I don't have a degree in this. I want to go back to school. So I went back to school. Also had an opportunity to, at the same time, start a company, not as a co-founder, but as a first employee with Randy, my colleague that I've worked my whole career with, called Bridger Photonics, which I'll get to in a second. But grad school, I had to pivot. I had a computer science degree, which is in the College of Letters and Science. I wanted to go into engineering, electrical engineering, which is where you can do optics and photonics type work. That's not a normal pathway. That's not a pathway that people take. I had to forge my own path and figure out, I don't want to go back to undergrad for 4 years and then that's too much school. How do I go into this without having to go to school for 4 more years? Found a path, unblocked the roadblocks there, and was able to convince them to let me take a couple of courses within engineering, and so I could go into the master's program for electrical engineering. I think that one of the key things there was the industry experience, right? I was thinking about going to grad school after undergrad, but I had no idea if I wanted to do that. So going into industry experience and spending 3 years and saying, I know what I want to do. I know I want to go invest this time and resources and effort into something like this was imperative for me to know that I was doing the right thing. So I think that's a key that I learned, not for everyone, but I think it can be for some. I also learned in a different way what hard work really looks like. Obviously, from a labor perspective, I grew up on a farm, worked 16-hour days. I know what that's like. From a mental stressor perspective, like I said, I was also starting a company with these guys called Photonics, working there full-time, and going to grad school full-time. That's not a traditional pathway when people go to school. They just think I have to quit my job, go to school, or quit my dream job, go to school, and then go find a job after. If you're willing to work hard and put in the time, you don't have to do it that way. I worked at the company, I helped them start the company while I went to grad school. Yes, I worked from 8 to 6, went home and ate dinner, did homework from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. every day for basically 2 years. But it was worth it because I didn't have to give up an opportunity to start this company that's put me on the path that I am today. And also, that picture up there in the right, that was kind of the culmination of my graduate work. And some people also said earlier, it's like solving problems builds confidence. Like being able to spend 2 years to solve a really hard problem that had a mission. That system was supposed to be used to detect methamphetamine labs here in Montana because we have a huge problem with that. Important mission, solving a hard problem, gave me a lot of confidence that I use today still to propel me forward. As I mentioned, I was working at Photonics and helping them. I was the first employee while I went to grad school. After grad school, I went full-time and really started my entrepreneurship journey there. Turning research into business is a challenge, right? A lot of companies can start by doing what we call SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research, STTR, getting government grants to get a business going. It's great. It's a great opportunity to start a business. But those typically aren't commercial markets. They want to be used for a specific purpose within the government, DoD, whatever it might be. So we have to do things we call bootstrapping, which is take that technology and work basically twice as hard to try to make that into a commercial product. We worked 80 hours a week for pretty much 5 to 6 years, from 2007 to 2013. Was it worth it? Health-wise, probably not, but reward-wise, yes, I think it was worth it. That picture in the bottom right was the culmination of what I did for mid-range. Yes, it didn't work for methamphetamine detection, but I found a customer that wanted that laser, developed it, got a purchase order for $600,000, basically right out of grad school at 23, 24, 25 years old, and felt like I reached the pinnacle. It was like, oh my gosh, I developed something that somebody wants. I'm going to go do this. Was never able to make one work. None. Zero. Complete failure. Could not commit to the PO. Nothing. So I really felt for the first time what failure felt like. I would like to sit here today and say that I was a professional about it. I handled it with the best character. No, I was a big baby about it. I sat in the back of rooms. I pouted. I took days off when I shouldn't have. It wasn't great. It took the people around me, coaching, to tell me this phrase that character is built more in failure than in success, right? So in those failures is where you build your strongest character. It took me a while to figure that out, but it was one of the greatest life lessons that I've ever learned. Finally, part 2 of being smart isn't everything. I'm not the smartest person in the room, never have been. Plenty smart to solve problems. I knew everything about that laser. It wasn't because I wasn't smart enough. It's because I didn't have the other proper skills, the vision, the process, the dedication, whatever those things might be to succeed. So part 2, smart isn't everything. You got to develop other skills. From there, in about 2015, that picture that I had on the previous slide in the upper right, which we call a LiDAR sensor, that we've also been working on after my complete and utter failure of the laser that I couldn't fulfill. We started a company around that technology called Blackmore Sensors and Analytics. Right away, learned that scaling a company is hard. We were able to raise a Series A investment shortly after starting Blackmore for $4 million. They expect you to scale. So we scaled from 1 to 35 people in less than a year. That's hard. We then raised a Series B investment for $18 million to scale from about 35 people to about 100 people. That's even harder. If you look at the statistics, most companies that try to cross the 70 to 100 person threshold fail. I think it's something like 95% of companies fail. Accountability is hard to keep up, processes, HR, whatever it might be. Companies typically fail when they cross that threshold. We were able to be successful through a lot of grit and perseverance, but that is a big pitfall in entrepreneurship. I also learned what accountability really feels like, right? Farm life, there's accountability. If I don't pick my dad up, he'd be pretty pissed for a while, but he'd get over it. Accountability feels like when you have 100 people that are relying on you to keep the doors open of the business so they can feed their families. That's accountability, and that's really heavy. So it's not for everyone, but I feel like that pressure is good for people to feel that level of accountability. Timing and persistence matter. That speaks for itself. You got to get lucky sometimes. You got to hit the markets at the right time. We were fortunate to do that. And then ins and outs of venture capital. It's not for everyone. It's a very great way to accelerate to a market. If you feel like the market's going to be short, you're competing with people who can get there faster, venture capital is a way to do it. But you're going to give up control. You're going to have external pressure to now dictate what you have to go do. You can't pivot quite as easily. But it is a great way, and we were able to succeed in that, to go and accelerate and make a company that ultimately we were able to go get acquired. I'll talk about that in a second. At the same time, this is where things get insane for me. I was also on the board of directors for the MPIA, which stands for the Montana Photonics Industry Alliance. And there's actually over 40 companies in the valley here that do optics and photonics. It's one of the highest per capita densities of optics companies in the United States. I bet none of you guys knew that. So we wanted to start this program at Gallatin College, which is a 2-year arm of Montana State University, to develop a 2-year technician program for basically laser electro-optic photonics technicians. So I wrote the curriculum, I got it approved through the Board of Regents, I got a grant for $300,000 to seed the program, handed it over and said, here you go. They went to hire a program director, nobody applied. So I had a real conundrum where I had to say, do I let this work and this important thing for the overall community die, or do I go take it over and lead it? We made a decision with my co-founders that I was going to split time and go do that. And it was really rewarding. Some graduates up there. I graduated 60 kids over 5 years, all working in the industry, high-paying jobs, changing veterans' lives, a lot of great rewarding things with that. Wouldn't change it for the world. Giving back is important, investing in the next generation. For some reason, I also agreed to take over the presidency of the nonprofit. So at the same time as co-founding a company and running a program at the university and having kids at the same time, I think I was insane. I had honestly looked back, I have no idea what I was thinking and trying to undertake that type of thing. But I got through it, and I'm really glad I did, because even the nonprofit stuff is where I really developed my leadership skills, right? When you have to ask people that you're not paying, that have jobs, CEOs, CTOs, COs, whatever they are, to do things for you on their own time, when you're not paying them, when they're very busy, that's really hard to do and takes real leadership. And I developed probably most of my leadership skills in those 3 years of running that. 2019, we got approached by Aurora to acquire our company. Once again, one of those moments when you get that letter, really the highs of the highs. You then go through a series of highs and lows and highs and lows, right? You go through a period in M&As called the due diligence period, where you have basically 1,000 things that you have to check off. Every single one that you don't, you feel like the deal is going to fall through. Every time you do one, you think it's going to succeed. And it's just this ebb and flow consistently through the entire 6-month due diligence phase. To be real, between our Series A and Series B, we got approached in an M&A deal with a company that I promise you that you know, but I'm not going to say, went through the entire due diligence phase, got completely onboarded onto the company, went to the last day of signing, and their board pulled the deal out. And we were left flat on our face with basically no money because we'd burnt most of our Series A, and 35 people looking at us and said, what are we going to do? So, no time to be the victim, right? We had to go solve the problem. That's when we went and raised the Series B, and the rest is history, right? So, no time to be the victim. You got to forge ahead. You got to persevere, because if you just lay down, a lot of people's lives have been affected by that, and we wouldn't be where we're at today. Final thing in mergers and acquisitions, giving up control is hard. It's called founderitis. It's got a lot of different names. It's real. A lot of founders don't stick around. I'm very adaptable. I don't mind being told what to do for the most part. And so I'm still there, but giving up control is hard, and having people tell you how you're supposed to do things when for the better part of your career, you've been doing it your own way. So now here I am today. I'm the Director of Lidar Engineering at Aurora. I'm on this great mission. Aurora is building self-driving trucks. Right now we're driving them driverless across Texas right now. Yes, they have an observer, but they're all driverless. It works. This technology works. We are 80,000 people short from a driver technology, and there's so many truck-induced deaths on the roadway that would blow your mind. We know our mission is going to make the roadway safer and solve a big logistics problem. But the mission of saving lives is what I'm here and for, right? I've learned that autonomous vehicles are very complex. Surprise, right? They're really hard to do. Scaling things from 1 to 10, 1,000, 10,000 is very hard. Before this job, I was very good at making one of pretty much anything. But making 1,000 work exactly the same way and sit on top of a vehicle in Texas with 130-degree heat, that's difficult, right? And that's what we're doing here at Aurora. In the facility here, we develop LiDAR sensors for Aurora self-driving trucks. To be successful in that, we've had to lean into process. You can't just wing it anymore. If you're actually going to be successful and make these LiDAR sensors safe so that the truck is safe, it takes process in everything that we do. And I'm learning a lot about what that means. You can't do it alone. That's one of the messages I'm going to say on my conclusion. I'm going to jump to it. You saw through my entire slide deck what you saw, pictures of all my team, my family, and my members. You can't do it alone, and nor should you. Successes are much better celebrated with others, right? If you're just talking to yourself like, hey, that was cool, that's not very fun when you're celebrating with somebody else. The failures, when you share it with other people, it shares the burden. Don't do it alone. Makes it no fun at all. Going back to the top, I've talked about work ethic and accountability. I think those are key. They've gotten me a long way. That's what I look for when I hire people today, and I think a lot of other people do as well. Problem-solving skills are imperative. I've already mentioned this with the new AI tools coming out in YouTube. We have to find ways to keep developing problem-solving skills. If we don't, I think we're doomed as a society. So please, focus on how you can still develop problem-solving skills. Do what you're passionate about. That's easier said than done, but keep trying until you find it. Don't confuse your hobby with your passion. I love golf, but I'm not going to be a professional golfer, nor am I nearly good enough to do that, even if I wanted to. So don't confuse that, but find your passion. It makes work life so much better. Expect to fail and then to learn the art of picking yourself back up. If you walk through life thinking you're not going to face failure, adversity, and challenge, I can promise you, you're going to live a life of disappointment. It exists around every corner. You'll face it either in personal and professional life. And like I said, you build your character most when you do that in failure, more so than successes. So learn that art. Don't do it alone. I talked about that. Be a spark. Everybody thinks there has to be some big thing to provide a spark in somebody that would turn into a wildfire. It doesn't have to be that. It can be small things. Patting them on the back, giving an opportunity, buying a robotic arm, donating something to the high school. You have no idea how much you can change people's lives. I didn't think about that going into academia. I said, I'm just teaching kids to support the community of optics and photonics. I got to work with veterans coming out of the program and finding them new homes and a new family to work with. Little sparks there went a long way. Be that spark for somebody. And finally, leadership comes from actions, not titles. The best leadership skills are developed when you don't have the title to just tell people what to do. So when you have those opportunities, like a lot of us do, use those to develop your leadership skills. It'll take you a long way. And I'll leave you guys with this. I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to be alive, one, have my arm, two, to have the successes that I've had, and there's been a lot of luck around every corner. I can tell you 10 times through that entire journey that one thing an hour earlier happens, I'm not standing here today talking about this story. I'm standing somewhere else telling a different story. So I acknowledge that I'm very lucky and things could be different, right? But I live and die by the phrase that lucky people are just unlucky people that never give up. So take that home with you and employ that in your everyday lives. Thank you.